Hey guys, welcome back to another Destiny 2 video. Today's video is the first Titan build of Final Shape, and it's one I'm extremely excited to share with you. For those wondering what this build actually does, here's a quick demonstration. This is me in a lost sector at 55 light underpowered. This is the build that I used to breeze through a lot of content in Final Shape so far, and it's definitely something I'm going to be bringing to the day one raid. Before we get into it, be sure to like and subscribe for more Destiny 2 content just like this, and let me know down in the comments what you thought of this build down below. Getting right into it though, let's start off on our subclass with Prismatic. Now, as far as super goes, it's really up to you, whichever one you want to use. However, if you want to maximize survivability and damage output, which is kind of the whole focus of this build, you want to go with Twilight Arsenal. Not only does it offer a weakened source that can potentially amplify your own melee damage, but it also acts as a way for us to get Void Overshields, which also give us even more damage amplification through some other sources. However, though, you can technically use any super if you want to. Void is going to be your go-to, though, for best survivability in my opinion, as well as having the greatest damage amplification. For your abilities, class ability really doesn't matter. I prefer Thruster just because it's on a shorter cooldown, and I really don't have a lot of use for barricades in PvE, specifically with this build that is. For your melee, go with Frenzied Blade. We're not going to be using the ability itself that often. The main reason we're using Frenzied Blade, though, is to have 3 melee charges, and we're going to convert those 3 Frenzied Blade charges into 3 Consecration Slams. And then finally, for your grenade, you can use any kind of darkness grenade to benefit the best with this build. I personally like using Glacier Grenade over Shackle Grenade, especially since the recent Consecration changes let the explosive potential of a Glacier Grenade work very well with the Consecration Slam. Next up, onto the aspects. The first one is Knockout. And Knockout previously wasn't that great of an aspect in my opinion, but coming into Final Shape, it got a multitude of buffs that's made this an absolute monster in PvE. The first thing with Knockout is critically wounding a target or breaking their shield activates Knockout, and basically lets your melee do more damage and have a further lunge distance, and the damage increase was actually doubled going into Final Shape, from 25% to 50%. And also, defeating targets with melee attacks not only makes you amplified, but it also restores a portion of your health. Previously, Knockout only started your health regen, and the problem with PvE is that meant if after you got your kill, any source of damage, no matter how small, hit you, it would immediately cancel the health regen, and you basically got no benefit for that melee kill. Now it gives you a large chunk of health immediately, so you're always going to get that advantage on a melee kill compared to areas where you didn't previously. We're combining this with Consecration. In short, while you're sliding, you activate your powered melee. It launches you up, casting out a scorching wave that first hits enemies. Then while you're airborne, you hit melee again. It causes a massive solar explosion, resulting in a huge ignition with a ton of melee damage. While there are many benefits between Consecration and Knockout, I do want to point out a small interaction I found very useful. The first thing is that the initial wave sent out by Consecration before you actually do the slamming animation actually can proc Knockout if enough damage is dealt to a target, meaning you don't have to waste a powered melee ability or go off and get a melee kill in order to proc Knockout and then try to time it into your Consecration Slam. As long as this hits an enemy and deals enough damage or breaks a shield, it will auto proc Knockout for you. Onto the fragments, just keep in mind I don't have all of the prismatic fragments unlocked currently, and I do have another fragment I would recommend, but it's just currently not available to me. Getting into it though, Facet of Balance is the first fragment. In short, rapidly defeating targets with light damage grants melee energy, defeating targets with darkness energy grants you grenade energy. The main reason we're using this is because our melee, which is a huge AoE damaging melee, is a light ability. Therefore, getting kills with it will grant us melee energy. This is kind of like Ember of Searing on Solar Titan, where it also granted you melee energy for defeating scorched targets. This will function similar to that and help with some intrinsic melee regen. I'm also pairing this with Facet of Courage, which anytime you deal damage with an Arc, Solar, or Void ability, aka our Consecration Slam, it will deal 10% more damage to enemies affected by a Darkness debuff. We can apply this Darkness debuff in a couple different ways. The first one is intrinsically with Frenzied Blade by hitting them first with this ability. Another way you can do it is by using your grenade, in this case a Glacier Grenade or a Shackle Grenade. Again, that's why I mentioned these two earlier. The other way you can actually do it is with Facet of Bravery. I just don't have this unlocked yet. The way that this works is by getting kills with powered melee abilities, it grants your strand weapons Unraveling rounds, and Unraveling is a strand debuff or a darkness debuff, meaning that if you use something like Swordbreaker with 1-2 Punch, for example, as a weapon to pair with this build, and actually it's the weapon I'm personally recommending, that strand weapon can apply Unraveling, which then will automatically proc Facet of Courage directly from it. But again, you can use your other abilities like your Glacial Grenade or your Intrinsic Frenzy Blade to also do the same. I'm also pairing this with Facet of Protection. While surrounded by combatants, you are more resistant to incoming damage, and while you're Transcendent, you actually have even more damage resistance. Again, just helping us survive by stacking this with the healing found on Knockout and some other effects I'll get into in a second. The next one is Facet of Honor. Collecting an elemental pickup or destroying a Tangle grants Transcendence of the same energy type. For this build, the most common version of an elemental pickup we're going to come across is a Void Breach, thanks to our super being a Void super. And for our Tangles, again, that could just come from our Frenzy Blade melee. But in short, both of these are going to give us increased Transcendent energy and help build us up into Transcendence. And then the final one is Facet of Purpose. Picking up an Orb of Power grants either Amplification, Restoration, Frost Armor, Woven Mail, or a Void Overshield based on the damage type of your equipped super. This is again why we're actually using Twilight Arsenal, because not only is it acting like a weakening effect and it's a nice one-off super for Titan, but it's also allowing us to get a Void Overshield, which again through other sources will amplify our melee damage even further. Like I mentioned earlier though, if you wanted to use a different super such as Blade Fury or Glacial Quake, you can do that instead. Mainly because you'll still be getting Frost Armor or Woven Mail with those supers, and that allows us to have the same damage amplification that we can get when we have a Void Overshield. Again, I'll go over where that's coming from here in a second. On to the artifact mods for today then. Keep in mind, I'm personally going over only the artifact mods that are really relevant to this build, so if you're using certain weapons that might benefit from mods I'm not using, or if you're trying to fit this build into a different playstyle to better fit what you want to get out of it, you might want to change this around to better fit your own build. For the first mod, it's Void Hegemony. While you have a Void or Prismatic subclass equipped, defeating weakened targets provides a small Void Overshield. This fits in greatly with our Void super because it applies a weakening effect, basically meaning anytime that we get kills with our Void super, we get a small Void Overshield, which again has additional effects. I'm also using Radiant Orbs. Just anytime we pick up an Orb of Power, it also makes us Radiant. This means that we can bypass the Radiant fragment for our subclass and just get Radiant for free. Radiant is mainly only going to benefit our weapon damage, but since it's so easy to take advantage of, we might as well use it. We're also using Galvanic Armor. While you have an Arc or Prismatic subclass, incoming damage from combatants is reduced when you're amplified. And again, since Knockout is basically always being procced with this build and we're always going to be amplified, we can have damage resistance on top of our subclass fragment damage resistance, greatly increasing the survivability of this build. For the final two mods, I'm using Shield Crush. While you have Woven Mail, Frost Armor, or Void Overshield, your melee recharges faster and deals increased damage. And while you're amplified or radiant, your grenade charges faster and deals increased damage. What this basically means is that since we're always radiant, we're always going to have an increased grenade regen and grenade damage, but we're also going to always have our melee regen and our melee damage increase dramatically. The way we're doing this is via our Void Overshield, which is what I mentioned earlier, but again, if you wanted to use a Stasis or Strand super, you can do that as well and take advantage of Woven Mail or Frost Armor for even more survivability. For those wondering, the damage increase is about 25%, and the regen increase is about 20%. And since with this build we're constantly amplified and radiant, as well as constantly getting Void Overshields just by getting melee kills and picking up Orbs of Power, it allows us to have constant melee and grenade regen and damage increases. The final artifact mod that I just don't have enough energy to equip right now is Transference. In short, you gain increased grenade and melee damage while you're Transcendent, and weapon final blows while Transcendent refund light and dark energy after Transcendent ends. The main reason we're using this though is for the increased grenade and melee damage, specifically melee for this build, and this is a 10% damage increase while Transcendent. Again, just further amplifying the damage increase we can actually achieve with this build. Finally, onto the armor mods for the build. Since this playstyle mainly focuses on pure melee damage and melee spam, there really isn't much going on here other than just the basic support for our survivability and our melee regen. So starting off on our helmet, the first one I have is a Harmonic Siphon, just to benefit the weapon I'm using most with this build, which is actually Tractor Cannon to act as a debuff, further amplifying our melee damage. Besides the Siphon mod, I'm also using a Heavy Ammo Finder and Special Ammo Finder mod. It's not that we're going to get a ton of benefit with these, as again, this is a melee and ability focused playstyle, but there really isn't much else to equip on our helmet besides maybe something like Hands On, but we get our super back fast already, so there's not really much point in that. This is mainly just serving as an additional way for us to get more reliable ammo drops for stuff like our 1-2 punch shotgun and Tractor Cannon. But if you want to fit in something else, for example, go right ahead. Next up onto our gauntlets, and our exotic for today is Syntheseps. In short, while you're surrounded, you gain an increased melee and super damage buff, and you also get improved weapon handling and reload speed. Again, the main focus is the melee damage and super damage. I will be recommending an exotic alternative in case you want to fully focus on melee damage with this build, but I'm mainly using Syntheseps just for the sheer ease of use that this exotic provides, as well as the decent damage increase for your melee and your super. As far as the mods for it though, I'm using 3 stacks of Heavy Handed. In short, it's going to let our powered melees generate an Orb of Power with a 1-second cooldown in between usage, and the main reason we're taking advantage of this is not to have it proc off our consecrations, which it still will do, but to have it proc off our standard melees. For those that don't know, Titans have elemental punches, which means that while Knockout is active, Roaring Flames is active, or you have a Void Overshield specifically on Void Titan, you will have an elemental punch substitute your standard melee. And this will actually count as a powered melee ability. So what this means for the build is that as long as we're getting melee kills and we're constantly proccing Knockout, every single melee that we do is going to generate an orb of power. So this will attribute to a ton of super regen, a ton of ability procs, as well as the mod support built directly into other armor pieces. In case you want to maximize your melee damage though, I would go with Wormgod Caress over Synthoceps. Wormgod is essentially a tiered system, and at tier 5, which you reach just by getting melee kills, it's going to give you a ton of benefits, specifically a 265% melee damage increase. The only thing that Wormgod is really missing out on is it doesn't have any way to amplify your super damage, so there is a bit of a trade-off between the two. Regardless of which one you pick though, I do want to quickly point something out. The damage that we can actually deal with Consecration through Prismatic is actually higher than that of Solar Titan. And the reason for that is that Roaring Flames, which is the damage amplification for Solar Titan, doesn't have perfect compatibility with Synthoceps or Wormgod Caress. It deals less damage than what it normally does. But Knockout doesn't, and so with Knockout's buff bringing it to a 50% damage increase, Knockout will actually deal more damage when used with Synthoceps and Wormgod Caress than Roaring Flames will on Consecration's standard subclass, meaning that our Consecration slams with this build will actually out-damage Solar Titan by a fair amount. As for the rest of the armor, again, it's pretty much just supporting the melee-focused playstyle, nothing too complicated here. Our chest piece, I'm using 3 resist mods, and I'm just fitting this out to whichever activity I'm doing based on the enemies I'm fighting. But again, if you wanted to have, say, more heavy weapon ammo and want to use Tractor Cannon like I am, you can fit it in a Void Reserve, or again, swap these out based on whatever activity you're doing to best combat the enemies you're facing. For our legs, I'm simply using a stack of Recuperation just to stack onto Knockout's effect by allowing us to get a small chunk of health every time we pick up an Orb of Power. And for the other 2 mods, I'm just using 2 stacks of Absolution, just anytime we pick up that Orb of Power to get our health back. It's also giving us a bit of ability energy across the board. Also keep in mind, picking up that Orb of Power is going to grant us a Void Overshield, which is going to provide us with better survivability and damage amplification for our melees, and that health increase is also going to stack with Knockout directly. This is why having 3 stacks of heavy-handed on our gauntlets is so important with this build, as it allows us to proc all these effects as much as we can. And then finally for the mark, I'm personally using 2 stacks of Powerful Attraction, just resulting in a larger area for our collection of Orbs of Power anytime we activate our class ability, and again, by using Thruster, we can activate our class ability more often. We're combining this with Distribution, which also allows us to get a little bit more ability energy back every time we use said class ability. So not only is our Thruster coming back incredibly quickly compared to the other barricades, but it's also picking up Orbs of Power on use and regenning our abilities across the board. Finally, onto the weapons. There are a variety of weapons I would recommend using with this build. I'm first going to go over what the ones I use are, and then go into some other recommendations I would personally substitute. The first weapon I'm using is Tractor Cannon, and this is just for the purpose of maximizing our melee damage. This will provide a 30% debuff onto affected enemies, specifically good against bosses and champions, and will allow us to do 30% more melee damage against them. There's really no other greater effect with this. Again, it's just to maximize our melee damage. As far as what weapons to pair with this, any 1-2 punch shotgun works great. I already mentioned Swordbreaker earlier and its other compatibilities with this build, but again, a 1-2 punch shotgun in general is going to work very, very well, because even if we can't take advantage of it with Consecration, it can still buff our base Frenzy Blade or even our base powered melee. In addition, any weapon with Pugilist works really, really well with this build. I personally like using the Battler for a combination of Pugilist for melee regen, as well as blunt execution rounds, which frequently allow this weapon to output a ton of quick burst damage against minor enemies. Another perk on weapons I really want to recommend for pairing with this build is Golden Tricorn, which is just a good perk for Transcendence and Prismatic in general. Golden Tricorn is a stacking damage bonus on weapons that can result in a 50% damage boost. I mainly use stuff like Golden Tricorn on builds that have some kind of infinite or at least very prevalent melee chain or ability chain to them. Stuff like Sunbracers on Solar Warlock or Hammer Titan with Solar Titan. Even stuff like Strand Titan with Frenzied Blade. These builds have constant ability uptime, which means you can continually proc Golden Tricorn fairly easily. And with Prismatic, specifically while Transcendent, you basically have infinite abilities in general, which allow you to have a ton of damage output. So using something like Golden Tricorn could be very, very valuable, especially when combined on a solar weapon with our Consecration melees. In case you're still interested in other weapons though, really the only other recommendation I have that I believe is a great fit for this build is Monte Carlo. This will allow you to get your melee back incredibly quickly and is the fastest way to get all of your melee charges back in the game. Besides that though, again, any weapon with Pugilist, Golden Tricorn, or Demolitionist is going to work great with this build. Anyway guys, that's the build for today. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, I personally believe this has some of the best survivability and damage in the game for Titan, and it's definitely something that rivals Solar and Strand Titan in terms of its raw potency. It's a build that I've been using to breeze through a ton of Final Shape content post-campaign, and it's something I'm definitely going to be taking into the day one raid. I hope you guys try out this build for yourself and have as much fun as I've been having. Dim link is down in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching. I greatly appreciate your support of these videos, and as always, have a great day.